So thank you everybody for joining. This is our second fantastic virtual underground wine event. Sadly, we could not do anything live this year for obvious reasons. But what I would like to say is that does not mean that we should, we should not support these wineries. That does not mean that we should, forget about them. It more than ever now they need our support. So this is what we are doing. We're gonna have about a 45-minute conversation with these wonderful folks, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so we have, actually, I'll let you all introduce yourself. Who do we have tonight? Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Keller from Keller Estate Winery, and we are located in Petaluma on the southern tip of Sonoma County in what used to be Sonoma Coast, but is now the Petaluma Gap area.
Okay. April.
Oh, hey guys, April Nalle from Nalle Winery. We're in Dry Creek over here, about 2 miles from Healdsburg town.
And Stu.
I'm Stu Smith, Smith-Madrone. Our vineyards are at the very top of Spring Mountain, which is just west of St. Helena in the Napa Valley.
And Laura.
Hi, Laura. I'm one of the co-founders of Underground Wine Events with Elizabeth.
Woohoo. Okay, so we're going to start out. Everybody's going to answer the same question. You've already introduced yourself, but what do you guys strive for in the wines that you make? I think this is a really important distinction between you and other people who are making wine in the world, right? Because ultimately, it becomes a situation where, there's industrial wine and then there's you. So when you're thinking about making wine, or you're thinking about putting a style of wine out in the world, what is that style? What do you sort of aim for? April?
I can jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in. So Nalle, we're known for Zin. So more than that though, Nalle is known for its style of Zin, which we started the first vintage. My father-in-law, Doug Nalle, started the first vintage in 1984. And our style of Zin has always been what we call old school California. So it's moderate alcohol. It's meant to age. It's meant to pair with food. It's dry. It has bright acidity. And in terms of that question, our style and the way we make wine is very important to us because we've never changed. We never chased points. We never folded to any consumer preference, so to speak. So that has always been the key to Nalle. And I always laugh because we haven't done hardly any marketing. I mean, you guys were our first, I'm like, wine for normal people is our marketing, basically. And so our style and how we make wine, it's very traditional. It's a small production, and it's a lifestyle. And that, I think that's really important to us. We live and die by the quality of our wine. And not necessarily, because I used to work for big companies, and marketing made the wine, so to speak. So we're the opposite. We stand by our style, and we'll never change that. And I think that answers a little bit of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stu, you want to talk about
Sure.
you've been at this a little while.
Our style is to, it's not a style, it's a concept. And that is to get the vintage into the glass of wine. I guess another way of describing it is that we're more European centric than California centric. We believe in balance, complexity, elegance, restraint, finesse, things like that. Words that are tough to define, but I think in the overall, they give us a sense. We're, like April said, we don't go after points. We are doing our very best to make wine for ourselves. And if people like it, that's great. And as long as there's enough people to buy our wine, we stay in business. But the overarching thing here is to get the vintage in the glass of wine. I think it's why we vintage date things, and it celebrates the diversity of the vintages. Now, every wine we want, great, but we let the grapes kind of define who what we're doing with them.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And you've been at this for a little while. How long have you been doing this, Stu?
This is our 50th year.
Gosh, it's amazing that you started in utero. Okay, Anna, would you like to tell us about
Cheers.
Keller? Hey, you know what? I'm here to make you look good, Stu. You know I love you. All right, so Anna, tell us about Keller and your unique proposition.
So I think Stu and April touch on two things. The consumer, we don't make the wines thinking of the consumer, but we make the wines thinking about the vintage. And the third thing is we make the wines with a sense of place. Though I think those are the three pillars that really define small producers. And, we were just talking as we started, we prune knowing what we're going to bring into the winery, in what order, what we want to vinify. And so for me, it's also a combination of showing, it's expressing our property through time and through our vineyards. And hopefully there's plenty of wine out there. And so the style of wine that we want to make, because we feel it showcases best our fruit, is what we hope somebody will enjoy. And if that's what you enjoy, great. If not, there's other wineries that you can enjoy that from, which really I think is a huge difference between the commercial wines that have guidelines from marketing or from sales that people want this and people want that. Once you know a little bit more what you want, we're here to kind of make it happen. And I think, I just had a lovely roast chicken, and we also make our wines to be food friendly. That's one of our main goals, is always to be keeping that in mind.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that this is a real trend in the underground wine events, because you're small wineries and you're not beholden to making some enormous amount of wine in which everything has to be, a certain way or homogenized or has to be for a certain market. And I think that that's a really important factor here as well. So Anna, while I have you, let's talk a little bit. I hate actually that saying. Let's talk a lot about the Petaluma Gap and why it's so special and different. How many wineries are actually located in the Petaluma Gap versus how many people buy fruit from you, and talk about the cooler climate and what it's like to grow grapes and make wine from this fruit.
So there's probably about 2 or 3 wineries that are actually there's probably more, about 4 or 5 wineries nowadays in the Petaluma Gap that make wines from this area. But there's obviously about 80 wineries that buy fruit from the Petaluma Gap and take it to wherever their winery is, whether it's Russian River, further up in Healdsburg, Oakland, and they make the wines there. So that was really what our region is, a region of growers. And what happens, just to kind of refresh everybody's mind on what the Petaluma Gap is, there's a mountain range on the coast that runs parallel to the coast, and it sort of blocks the fog from coming into Sonoma County. At Bodega Bay, which is a little bit north of San Francisco, there's an inlet where there's great oysters, by the way, and the mountain range there runs perpendicular to the coast, which allows for a wind tunnel to be created, and that allows the fog and the wind to roll in from the ocean into town or into Petaluma and out to the San Pablo Bay. And that's why San Francisco gets that really cold summer weather. And that wind and fog is what makes this area really unique for grape growing, and why we worked at establishing as an AVA, an American Viticultural Area. And we finally got it in 2017. We're celebrating our 3rd year, January 8th. And that's, a little bit about our region. And what makes it really unique is that this wind really creates wines with bright acidity. That's one of the 2 things that I always come back to, is that the wind is just really cooling the vines at the end of the day and allowing for the acid to stay in the fruit, which is great because it gives you that nice, bright, natural acidity, which is great for food. And the second, sorry.
No. So this is just to kind of to talk about the coolness. Do you think that the Petaluma Gap and what you've seen with climate change over time has been mitigated slightly because you're always cold, right? I mean, or cool, or is it still the same kind of problems everybody else is having?
Well, you know what? It is climate change. It's not just global warming. And I think one of the things that we've seen, we are still praying for rain out here. Tomorrow, it's just, we don't have any water. We haven't even started filling the ponds, and we're already in January. So I do think that we're suffering as severely as any other vineyard in the world, global change, climate change. It's not always translated to temperature. There's a lot of other factors that affect our farming.
Yeah.
Anna, I have a question. So what do you strive for in the style of your wines? Specifically the roti. Can you talk about why you do the roti and the whole thought process behind it?
Well, you know what? It's funny because the roti was it was a grape that our vineyard manager back in 2000 said, you know what? I think we can ripen roti. We can ripen Syrah, and I trusted him. And we planted. We actually converted some Chardonnay to Syrah, and it does ripen here. We have to drop some fruit because it really doesn't have enough time to mature. But we end up having a really lovely, cool climate Syrah. And at some point, as a Stu 50, he beats everybody, but we've been doing this for almost 30 years. And you learn something every year. Every year you're experimenting. And one year we grafted 2 rows of Chardonnay to Viognier and started experimenting on what style of Syrah we wanted to do, who we wanted to become. And we realized soon enough that what makes beautiful wines in the Côte de Rôti of France is that kind of the combination and the peppery and the great acid, lovely tannins, great structure. And we were trying to achieve that same thing. And we kind of realized that the combination of Viognier and Syrah created this really interesting kind of side note to Syrah, which really showcased the place well.
You focus on Pinot and Chardonnay, and you make sparkling wine also. So can you talk about this separate, why you do a few different vineyards and what they express too?
Well, we only grow fruit. We only make wines from the fruit that we grow on our property. So I always say I have gap myopia, Petaluma Gap myopia, but you could also say I have Keller Estate myopia. I only see the fruit that we grow. And in order to really understand what we can do with our property, we've had to plant different things. We have to experiment with different styles of making the different wines. So it's been a lot of fun. And once you start noticing, like, we've got great acidity, what else can we do that has great acid? You start looking around for the sparkling wine. You start finding that acidity in the Pinot Noir. And, we make a Chardonnay, which is Oro de Plata, which is also bright and mineral and got great acidity. So I think that's been an exploration to better understand our property, because at the end of the day, I hope that the years that I make wine here create enough information for the next generation of Kellers to make even better wines.
And you've got those generations, right?
We do. We're making them drink wine and bottle and do inventory at this point.
There you go. All right. So we will come back to you in a second, but Stu, let's move to you. And I would love for you to talk to us about Spring Mountain versus Valley Floor. And, you talked about your European orientation. There's nothing more European than growing on mountainsides and slopes versus Valley Floor. So what does being on Spring Mountain allow you to do versus what people on the Valley Floor can do, and what kind of styles are you able to coax out of the wine versus the traditional big Napa style, which I think is quite different, no?
Yeah, maybe another way of looking at it is, why did I go to the mountains in the first place? And that's because, as Virgil said in 43 BC, Bacchus amat colis, Bacchus loves the hills.
Mm-hmm.
And I believed 50 years ago, as I believe today, that there are two fundamental things that are sacrosanct in making great wine. And that is that you can only make as good a wine as the grapes are. You can't take ordinary grapes and put in high technology and come up with something great. The day that you harvest your grapes, that is the pinnacle of what you can get out of the grape. It can't get any better than what you harvest that day. And the other one is that, all things being equal, I've always felt, like Virgil said, that the best grapes come from the mountains because they have to struggle. The soils are not as good. They're not deep, fertile, rich, alluvial soils. They are mountain soils with rocks and gravel and not the fertility. And so they have to struggle. And I think of them kind of anthropomorphic. Can't talk. I need another glass of wine. Like kids, but you've got to nurture them to get going, and then they start giving back to you as young adults. And so and then also we dry farm, and we dry farm as close as we can get to dry farming. This year may be a challenge because of the drought, as was 2017. But the idea is that the mountains produce, again, all things being equally, I think a more interesting grape, a grape which is smaller just by the inherent nature of the soil, that doesn't have the fertility, that we don't have the water that the valley floor irrigates with. And so if for those of you who have ever grown tomatoes in your yard, if you water the heck out of those tomatoes every day, you're going to get beautiful, big, juicy, red tomatoes. But when you cut into them, it's all water. There's no flavor. And when you grow grapes in the mountains, even with irrigation to a certain extent, but mostly we dry farm, you're going to get a smaller berry. And the skin to juice ratio is really important. The skin is where all the flavor and color is. And so if you water them, you're going to get something like a beach ball versus a golf ball. And you can kind of visualize the volume of a beach ball versus a golf ball and the skin going around it. So by growing grapes in the mountains, you're going to get a more intense character flavor. And people like to ask, what is the difference in the wine? And that's always been hard for me to define because it's a subjective concept. But I think the answer is that it is the structure of the wine. You can't say that there's a component that you get from the mountains. You can't say that there's this or that. What it is it's the whole package put together. It's in a unique way that a lot of most valley floor vineyards can't do. Now, that's not to say that there aren't bad wines made from the mountains, and there aren't really good wines made from the valley floor. But all things being equal, it's easier to get good quality grapes grown in the mountains than it is in the valley floor. And I think when you looked at April, and you can see her vineyards going up into the hills, and one of the things that I think all three of us are equally interested in is structure and character, and that comes from these unique areas where we're growing grapes. I might also say that for us, acidity is also very important. We may not be as cool as the Petaluma Gap, but we are generally one of the cooler appellations in the Napa Valley, especially when that fog rolls over from Petaluma. It rolls over Dry Creek in the valley, and then it hangs up on top of Spring Mountain. And in the middle of the summer, it can be absolutely freezing cold because we're sitting in the fog bank that's sitting on top of Spring Mountain.
Which is so key to Napa's success, and you're not losing that. Have you seen a lot of the deterioration of the fog due to climate change, or are you still getting the same amount?
The issue on climate change is really, really tough. I've seen the least amount of rain in 76, 77. We got 12 inches of rain. It wasn't, what was it, 98, we got 108 inches of rain.
Wow.
I've seen the coldest, the hottest, 2017, maybe one of the hottest vintages, especially during the Labor Day weekend, was just brutal. So there are changes, there's no question about that. The question is, how do we respond, and what can we do to respond?
But again, I mean, the mountainside, you're in a lot less of a desperate position than the valley floor that's getting direct sunlight all the time. And it's just beating down, and it's unrelenting. So I think that is, you were it was 50 years ago, but you were a smart man, like I said, in utero. You did a good job.
Well, the other thing about the climate changes is that these are going to be like microclimates going on all over the country, if not all over the world. There are going to be little changes here, there, and everywhere. One of the things that some people have come up with some research is that further inland, it will be hotter, and that hot air will go up and create a low that will suck in the ocean air. And one of the things that we have going for us on the West Coast is that our oceans are relatively cool during the summertime, whereas on the East Coast, they're hot as bejesus. And so, you know, just to say it again and again, but you know, Mark Twain's comment about the coldest winter he ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. I don't think that part is going to change very much.
Right, well, I mean, that's helpful from the wine perspective for sure. So I'm going to ask you one more question, which is, you know, April brought this up and we'll talk about it again with Nalle, but, you know, have you ever looked at the style of wine that you make and say, wait a second, you know, all these guys on the valley floor are making these big oak styles and they're critics, and, you know, it's a little bit less now. People are more educated and they're definitely making their own decisions. But has there ever been a time where you have been tempted or you have changed your style specifically for, you know, for the idea that you should, you know, basically try to get, you know, scores?
No, but that doesn't mean that we haven't tried to change our style a little bit. Two things. One is our Riesling. When we started out, we were making Riesling at about 1.7% residual sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And we had reasonably low alcohol, and we eventually lowered it and kept lowering it and lowering it to where now we're down to around 0.65% residual sugar. So we would call it a dry style. One of the interesting things about wine labeling is that there's no regulations on how you can describe your wine when it comes to sugar. So I was talking to a friend of mine 30 years ago, and we both made Riesling, and we were talking about it selling very well at the wineries, and he said, yeah, it sells great. And I said, well, you make some dry and semi-dry, or off-dry was the term that we used back then, which really wasn't very good. And I go, oh, I bet the off-dry or the sweet really does well for you. He goes, no, we do the dry style. I go, really? And I thought about it, and I said, and how dry is your dry? He goes, 2.5%.
Whoa.
Right. So
that's a lot of sugar, just in case. That's why I said whoa.
Yeah. Me too. And that's why I've remembered that 30 years later. So that is one of the things, but I'm not sure it's a style differentiation as it is maybe it is a style differentiation. And then the other one, we do a reserve, what we call a Cook's Flat Reserve. And that's a wine that we designed specifically to go after the first gross in Europe. And we looked at a lot of the California wines that were very high in alcohol, very extracted, very low in acid. And we looked at the price and we're going, that sucks. So in 2007, we started a Cook's Flat Reserve, and we make a wine which we think has all of those elements that I mentioned in the beginning, which is balance, complexity, elegance. And that is a wine that we make, again, for us. And it is designed, again, to go after that first growth concept. If we got into the position of chasing scores, and a lot of wineries will pay their winemakers based on their scores, their expectations, there'll be a floor, there'll be bonuses, whatever. I don't think I'd stay in the business. That is kind of just a reprehensible concept to chase scores. If you're a small winery like we all are, we're really truly artisanal in what it is that we're doing. It sounds like most of us grow all our own grapes. The family affair. This is not the way to get rich. This is the way to have a life and to enjoy it. And the idea of chasing scores is just hideous.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, but I think, some people, that's what they do, and they create brands just for that very purpose, which is
well. Let me just finish one other thing here, then you go on, and that is that there are a lot of wineries in both of our valleys where they were very successful and they got bought out, and the wines were good, and these big companies buy the wines, and then all of a sudden the wines have no soul, they have no character, they have. It's hard for me to say what they do to make the wines so bland and boring, but they do that.
You're stealing Fred Peterson's thunder, because that his entire thing is no soulless wines. And I feel like, you're getting ahead of yourself. Now I feel like we should have, we're gonna have to invite you back for Fred so you guys can talk about the soul of the wine, because he writes that right on the bottle, no soulless wines. And it's true. It is absolutely true. I think everybody in this group understands that for sure. All right, let's give Rachel that. We're going to move over to Rachel, to April.
Everybody calls me Rachel. I don't know. Everybody.
I mean, I don't know why I just.
I'm okay with it.
I mean, I love
April, Rachel. It's the same thing.
No, you're not. You're not like my Jewish cousin. So, all right. So, Laura, why don't you ask this before I continue to embarrass myself?
Ridiculous. All right, April. So Nalle has really set the benchmark for Zinfandel in Sonoma. You've been around for so long. You've stuck to your style, which is fantastic, obviously.
Yeah.
You're one of the oldest, you're one of the most revered brands in classic style Zin, and your wines taste like no other. So what is it that makes your style different from the newer styles of Zin?
I was thinking about that question. I love that question. It's kind of interesting, but what Anna was saying and what Stu was saying, see, I just did it. We all brought up acidity and natural acidity. And I think, and how wine pairs with food, and it's a lifestyle, and our winemaking philosophies, and I think that all plays a huge role in it, and our farming styles, and it's a family affair. So everything we do is for our families and for the next generation. And we're all unique characters. If you guys have met Doug and my husband, he's the winemaker, but I think all of us are part of the terroir and the wine that comes out of that as well, if that makes sense. But, and you can see our style of wine in Doug and his persistence. When he started Zin, I mean, we are in prime Zin growing country in Dry Creek. We have the densest, I guess, population of old vines in and here. And so it would just be natural that you would, gear towards making Zin here. And we have an estate old vine block. It was planted in 1927. And so, Doug kind of thought, but when he started, people were telling him, you're crazy because you can't just base a whole winery off of one style of Zin. He only made one style of Zin, the classic Zin. And, he said he'd be at a restaurant and people would ask for Zin. They'd expect it to be like a white Zin or a pink Zinfandel or whatever. And so when he started, he thought, I want to make a premium Zinfandel, because there's a huge spectrum. You can make rosé all the way to port, and so that's what he did. And he kind of brought the Bordeaux style into it, because our classic Zin has some Petit Sirah and Carignan and a small percentage, but it's mainly Zin. And we age it all in French oak. And now I'm going off. Am I going off topic?
No.
Okay, I'm like, wait, now what am I saying? No, so
I mean, you're talking about the style, which I think it's really hard for people to understand. I will mention one of your competitors by name, which is not really a competitor, but like Turley is this big style of Zin. Okay,
yes,
they burst out onto the market. It is enormous. I mean, that wine could not be bigger, and it is not your style at all. And I think that is really the ingredients and the way that you approach Zinfandel is not the same. And
No,
and it's surprising, right? When you have a Nalle Zin, it's like, what? You know, it's something totally different. You don't expect those flavors out of Zinfandel. But
yeah,
I think,
sorry, Liz. It's like the opposite of a big jammy Zin. It's aged in French oak. It has nice bright acidity. We pick it early. When we start picking, everyone starts getting their machines ready. You know, they start cleaning their tanks, and we're already picking, you know, our Zinfandel. But
right.
and so, but it's reminiscent of old school California, when you had jugs of wine on the table on Sunday afternoon, and people drank, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it was drinkable. They call it the working man's grape, you know, because the settlers or the homesteaders brought the clippings here. But we wanted to elevate it to be a premium, what we now call a weekend wine, because they're not super cheap. But really showcase the beauty of Zinfandel, which has really unique flavor characteristics. When you go out in the vineyard and you're tasting the grapes, you can really taste the flavor of the Zinfandel and what the wine might be when you're out there tasting. And we really like to showcase that bright, beautiful fruit. And if you hang it really, you know, you get more of the pruny, jammy stuff. And we like to show the more kind of complex bramble, spice, bright flavors. And I think, you know, every style has its place, but this is really a true sense of Dry Creek and the history of Dry Creek. And now I work in the tasting room a lot, and I see like younger people really coming in and liking this style of wine now, looking for the moderate alcohol, looking for the bright acidity, and not wanting that kind of residual, heavy, headachy kind of fruit bomb that you are used to if you just pick up a Zin off the, you know, grocery store shelf. I mean, and so we kind of say, or somebody coined this for us, but we've been on a Zin mission since 1984, because we really want to showcase the beauty of Zinfandel and how flavorful, and it has nice acidity, it has nice tannins, it's really a nice grape. It's not like, you know, you can't go selling Zinfandel for, you know, $60 in, I don't know, Oklahoma, I don't even know where, but it's because it has a different, you know, cachet, is that how you say that word?
Yeah.
Than cab. But if you can't get anything like it from these producers in Dry Creek.
You know, you also, first of all, I want to point out that April is, so Andrew makes the wine, but April is a specialist in the vineyard. She has a big history of working in Australia, working in different regions around the world, understanding terroir, the land, the vine. She is very, very skilled in terms of understanding terroir. This is her specialty. So I think that it's important to add that. So the thing is, though, you mentioned Cab, and you make a Cab also, and you also make Pinot, and they're great. So how do you don't grow that fruit, right? Or you grow some
we
of that
grow
fruit.
the Cab. We grow the Cab on the hill.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you approach the Cab in the same way that you approach the Zin?
I was laughing about that question because me and my husband always say, if it's not Nalle, if it's not hard, it's not Nalle. Like the way we make Zinfandel is so difficult. It's so hard. It's not easy to make wine this way. It's very hands-on, complex, and constantly, like, my husband's always in there, can't sleep, and you know, that kind of thing. But Cab is actually a lot easier to make. I mean, in a way, because it ripens
consistently.
Yeah. You know, it has kind of these specifics that it's easy. It can impart nice oak into it. It's just a little bit different because we, you know, so yeah, we make Cab, and we love Cab. We love our estate Cab. It's beautiful. It's on the hill, and it is in the Nalle style. So have the bright acidity. It'll age really well. But Zin is hard to make the way we make it, and I think that's also why we love it. It kind of has that, like Anna was saying, and Stu was saying, you can really taste each season in the bottle, each vintage. So.
Can I ask April a question?
Sure.
When you were describing things. People ask me how we make our Syrah. And I always say we make our Syrah thinking, because we're Pinot producers. So we make Syrah with a Pinot personality. I don't know if that happens to you with Zin and Cabernet.
Oh, you're so spot on, Anna. People used to tell us that we make the Pinot of Zinfandels. Like, and it's kind of like our style is kind of like that. It's a lot lighter and brighter. And so you know how it is. Pinot is hard to make too, because it's kind of finicky and you really want to showcase the elegant style of it. But Zin and probably Syrah in a way, the way you're making it can be just as difficult to showcase the elegant side of it. Otherwise, you just hang it out and leave it on the vine forever.
I agree. What people don't realize is you're trying to restrain yourself from, it's a lot easier to just let go and let things ripen and get more sugar.
Right.
We're so used to more is better.
Right.
And the whole point is just to, no, we pick today because, you know that's certain, you want to capture today. You don't want to, gamble on tomorrow. Ha.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
But again, that's showing some restraint, which I think it's not easy to do. And I think that it's also restraint in, like what Stu was saying about restraint in saying, no, we're not going to chase scores. We're not going to, it's in some ways that is an easy way to go about this, right? Is that you just get somebody to make a designer wine for you, or you can continue to make the style that you're going to make and know that there's going to be people who appreciate it, understand it, and that, yes, you have to do the work to maybe educate people, and you have to do the work to be found in some regards. Because I mean, you look at Dry Creek Valley, it's the worst valley to be in from a tourist perspective. There's like 5 million wineries. It's the easiest valley from a tourist perspective. But I feel that you can stand out once you get the reputation. People know, go to Nalle. They're going to give you a great tasting. They're going to give you something totally different. And I think that is what staying true to yourself and doing things like the hard way to do it, right? If it were easy, everyone would do it. And everyone does something else from what you do. So I think that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, if I may jump in, I think one of the issues that we are all kind of dancing around is that we had 2 of the most powerful magazines in the wine world loving a style that I guess that I don't think I'm presumptuous in saying that all 3 of us would hate. And these are wines that were
all 5 of us here would hate. Yes.
Yeah, they're very high in alcohol. For everyone who's listening, you get that high alcohol by leaving the grapes on the vines for a very long time. And and the longer it's on the vines, the higher the sugar. But at the same time, there's an inverse relationship, which is the longer on the vine, the acidity respires out of the grapes. So you get a dull, flat wine. And I am loath to kind of rip into somebody else's style of wine, but I can smell these wines. I don't have to taste them. I can smell a high pH wine, a low acid wine. And I can't drink them. There's not acidity there. You need acidity. And for 10, 12 years, we had to suffer through this. And it was like we were wandering the desert for 40 years. And finally, the world, and what happened too, is that it influenced Europe. They started making higher alcohol wines. And I thought that was the worst possible thing how could Europeans cave to this? We've been making wine for 7,000, 8,000 years. You think we would know when to pick the goddamn things. But in the wine industry, there's nothing more prescient than how do you decide when to pick the grapes and what style you want. And I think what we're seeing here is all 3 of us want to pick grapes where there is good acidity, there's ripeness, but there's not over ripeness. And when you get over ripeness, you lose all the individuality of the grape. They all taste the same. Mm-hmm. They're seductive in their original approach, but once you hone in on that, it's just raisins and prunes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed it is. I
have a question for all the wineries. Sorry to jump off the alcohol one. what do you want people to know about being a small winery in California? And now that you brought up, Europe changed their style as well. So compared to the whole world. So Anna, can I throw it to you first?
Wow, I was hoping I'd get third up, but no, what I want people to know, I think I want people to know that we really are putting we're putting our families, our hopes, our work into making wine is not something that happens overnight. The decisions that we're making every day won't be in the market for a year, 2 years. And I think, the commitment that we have to producing the most outstanding wines that reflect a sense of place, time, what we love is kind of captured in one bottle, but there's a lot that went into that bottle. So when you enjoy it, really, if we've learned something in 2020 is that we need to savor every moment. And so take the time to enjoy less wine, but great wine, because it does pay off.
All right, Stu, same question to you.
Well, maybe I'll answer it a little differently. One of the things I've seen about wineries and winemakers and wine people the world over, and that is, again, for the folks listening in, there's not a winemaker out there that doesn't love his children. And his children are the wines. And there is a family of vintners across the world. So if you go to Australia or Europe or South Africa or any other of the wine growing areas, there is a familiarity of wine growers. You understand what they're up against. The challenges of the vintage, the challenges of the weather, of climate change, and so there is and I'm not answering it quite in the way you asked, but it's a life that you have to live, and you live first as an agriculturalist, as someone who's close to the soil. And only after you can grow the crop and get through the harvest can you get into the thought process of the winemaking. But deep down, first of all, we're all farmers. That's where it all starts. And as agriculture, you have to both be an optimist and a pessimist. And that's a challenge within one system, because you're trying to be optimistic, and the last 3 or 4 years in this area have been enormously challenging for all of us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, the fortitude, and then economically, from the climate perspective, competition, there's just so many different factors involved in being a small winery, sticking it out, being successful. Not everyone is cut out for it, but I think that part of it, and we see a trend here, we saw it in our last, underground virtual event, and all the stuff that we do, is that the reason that you're part of what we consider our family here is that it's true that everybody has this philosophy that they care, that they are willing to dedicate and devote things that, they're not willing to take the easy way out. And I think that that's really important. All right, we're going to jump off Facebook Live, but if Stu and Anna and April, will you all stay for a minute to address some of the patron questions?
Sure.
As long as there's questions, I'll be here.